Alright, so today we turn to Berkeley, spelled like Berkeley, but it's pronounced Barkley. And as I indicated last time, he's going to take Lockean ideas, this notion of empiricism, as opposed to rationalism. So about empirical senses and so on and so forth, and perception, and push that to its logical conclusion. And he's going to leave us with a dilemma. And frequently students don't like either side of that dilemma. We got to get there first. And this particular excerpt is really well written because he kind of writes it in such a way that it's difficult to not fall into one of the two options. Okay? But first, in order to get there, because he's going to be talking about perception, perception, perception. Before we get there, then I want to read a kid's book, which is sort of a way of explaining Schrodinger's cat without talking about Schrodinger. What's inside this box? Monkey and cake. Monkey and cake are friends, because of course monkeys and pieces of cake are friends. Hello, monkey. Hello, cake. What do you have? I have a box. It's a big box. It is a big box. What is in it? A kitty cat. A kitty cat is inside the box? Oh, I love kitty cats. Can I see it? No, you cannot. It is a magic cat. Why can't I see the magic cat? Because the cat disappears when I open the box. So when you open the box, there's no cat inside. Yes. And when you close the box, there is a cat inside. Yes. When I open the box, there's no cat. But when I close the box again, the cat is back in the box. How do you know there is a cat in the box when it's closed? How do you know there's not a cat in the box when it is closed? I don't think there's a cat inside when the box is closed. Why not? I think there's no cat in the box when it's open, and when you close the box, there's still no cat inside. You can think anything you want about what is inside the box when it's closed. I can? Yes, you can. Then I think there's a dinosaur in the box when it is closed. You do? Can I see it? No. It's a magical dinosaur, and when you open the box, it disappears. I still think it's a cat. And I think it's a dinosaur. Well, we will never know. You're right, we will never know. Let's go get some pie. Okay, I love pie. The end. And so it even has questions in the back of this book. This is a kid's book. Listen to these questions. Hey there, reader. Do you believe in things you can't see? Do people you know believe in things that you don't believe in? Well, just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. Or does it? That's what best friends Monkey and Cake explore in their new adventure. What do you believe in? And the cat is actually Schrodinger's cat. Interesting stuff. I like that more and more kids' books are exposing kids to philosophical ideas and philosophical ways of thinking. I especially like the use of the word know and think. You can think whatever you want about the box, because thinking is different than knowing. And how would you ever know what's inside the box? Perception, by using your senses. That's kind of what Berkeley's getting at here. And so, in addition to Monkey and Cake book, I want you to be thinking about the movie Toy Story. Right? Again, not only one of Dr. Schrappe's favorite movies of all time, I also think it's one of the best movies of all time. It's about friendship and all this other stuff. There's also the philosophical underpinning. How do you know what your toys are doing when you're not around? Short answer, you don't. You don't know what they're doing. They could come to life. For all that you know, they could come to life because you're not there to perceive them. Many things could happen when you're not around to perceive them. And you don't know they're happening because you're not there. That perception is, for many folks, the primary justification for knowledge. Seeing is believing. Seeing is justifying. Would be more accurate rather than believing. Right? But you can think or believe whatever you want about the box. But if you want to prove what's inside the box, well, we're going to need to use perception for that. If you want to prove that your toys don't come to life, then we're going to need to perceive that. Which, notice, once you're perceiving them, then they don't come to life. Doctor Who, if you're familiar with Doctor Who, has a couple of villains that work in similar ways. The weeping angels, for instance, are statues while you're perceiving them. Then, when you turn around, they become monsters. There's also, what is it, the silence, that while you're not perceiving them, you forget that they exist. So you have to start making marks so that you know how many of them are around. Perception. If I were to attempt to prove to you that there's a horse right here, I'd have a hard time doing it because you can't perceive the horse. Let's go back to the communal stuff we talked about with Locke. If I'm the only one perceiving the horse, you would think Dr. Schrapppe's got some problems. Either he's pretending, or he's lying, or he has some visual problem or auditory problem if he's hearing the horse, or he's got some mental problem that he thinks he sees something or hears something that isn't actually there. If I start petting my horse, I start to wonder what's up with Dr. Schrappe. I mean, you probably already know I'm crazy. Remember, I'm married to a mental health counselor. She became a counselor after we got married. I'm just saying. So, it's about perception. Perception seems to be the best justification that we have, the justification that we typically use to prove things, right? Eyewitnesses in court cases, for instance, which have proven to be unreliable because our perceptions, let's go back all the way to Plato, the divided line, our perceptions are based so much upon not just our sensory input, but our own expectations, our own intellectual expectations of what it is that we're perceiving. And so eyewitness accounts actually reveal and unveil hidden prejudices rather than actual sensory experience. There are episodes of Brain Games about this and so forth, because our brain isn't prepared to pay close enough attention to the stuff that needs to pay close enough attention to, because we don't know something's going to happen that we then need to recall later. And so we're just kind of going about our day, not paying attention to this individual who walked into some place getting ready to rob it because we weren't expecting them to rob it. So instead, it's our mind overrides our sensory input data with regards to eyewitness accounts of things, typically speaking. Which is why eyewitness accounts differ, even when they claim to have seen the same thing. But anyway, back to Berkeley. Part of what makes this so good, this article, and again, he could be completely wrong, but the article itself, the excerpt itself, is really well written. He sort of writes you into a particular box that you can't get out of. It's a closed loop, as it were. Furthermore, what makes this so great is the fact that he grants his opposition everything that they want, and goes on to show why it still falls short. We also need to pay close attention to verb tense here. Okay, verb tense is very important here. All right, so let's start on page 98. It's also interesting to point out that, as I indicated last time with Descartes, we get this long lineage of philosophy being about thinking, 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 thinking. Berkeley agrees that we're thinking things, but there's something more to it than just that. The mind does more than just thinking. Page 98, very top. Thus, for example, a certain color, taste, smell, figure, and consistency having been observed to go together are accounted one distinct thing, signified by the name apple, for instance. Other collections of ideas constitute a stone, a tree, a book, and the like sensible things, right? Objects out there in space and time, which, as they are pleasing or disagreeable, excite the passions of love, hatred, joy, grief, and so forth. Wait a minute. Berkeley's talking about passions here, right? So these objects that we experience, part of, and let's just use the divided line as a go-to tether for this discussion. This ordinary object level is not just the objects, but part of what our mind does is associate things like emotions and feelings with these objects. We find certain things agreeable or disagreeable. So, example from Dr. Schrappe's life. I really don't care much about jewelry. The jewelry I have is my wedding ring. That's it. The end. I don't have jewelry. It's just not my thing. Okay? It doesn't excite my passions. So my wife and I were the first of our friend group, our associate group, to get married. And so as other people became engaged, then this was back in the days of engagement rings and whatnot. And so we would go and hang out with them and, oh, let me see the ring and all that nonsense. Nonsense for me, not for my wife. Okay. Thankfully, she doesn't dig too much jewelry either. Thankfully, as far as finances go. But anyway, so we go and she'd be like, oh, let me see the ring. And I wouldn't ask because I don't care. I don't care about jewelry. I don't care what the ring looks like, so on and so forth. So when we get in the car, my wife would be like, why didn't you ask to see the ring? I said, because I don't care. I don't care about jewelry. Right? And she was like, you have to at least pretend. That's the game that we play here. Right? When a friend gets engaged, you pretend, you act like you care about the ring, even if you don't. And I said, oh, so we're supposed to lie? And that got into a whole different discussion. But anyway, if you want to know the distinction between pretending and lying, again, I cover that in Intro to Ethics. So, there are certain things that just don't excite me. I'm not a gearhead, right? Cars and motorcycles and all that stuff do not turn my head when I hear one passing. Oh, wow, that's a whatever. I've got to turn and look, right? It excites my passions. Max Scheler, the German philosopher, wants to talk about ordo amoris, the ordering of your heart, the ordering of your loves, those things which you prioritize. I don't prioritize those things, so they don't excite me. I don't find them disagreeable, right? Or certain smells or something along those lines, right? It's not just that you have a smell of chocolate chip cookies. That smell of chocolate chip cookies transports you. It excites your memory. And so perhaps you find the smell of chocolate chip cookies agreeable because you remember, oh yeah, Grandma made chocolate chip cookies, I loved hanging out with Grandma, so on and so forth. There's all these other associations. All of this stuff gets smushed together in the object of chocolate chip cookies. And if you're into brain chemistry and biology and so on and so forth, the olfactory receptors and decoders are very, very close, physically, very, very close to the memory thing. So smells do elicit memories. Some research seems to suggest that smell might actually be the first sense that we acquire in the womb and the last sense that we have right before death. Not quite sure how you test that, but it was an article that I read once. Or think about the movie Ratatouille, if you've ever seen that movie. Right, when the food critic takes the bite of the ratatouille towards the end of the movie, right, he thinks, oh, this is, right, he has certain expectations about it, right, this is a peasant's meal, this is not fine food, so on and so forth, so he already has preconceived ideas. Then he takes a bite and there's the great scene where he's transported, you can kind of go into his mind's eye, he's transported back to his own childhood. So it's not just that he's tasting ratatouille, he's tasting ratatouille and it's eliciting all this other stuff. It's exciting passions, right? Passions, agreeable, disagreeable, so on and so forth. All of this stuff is connected to the thinking thing. All of this stuff is also taking place in the mind. The mind is not just thinking, not just deciding, not just doubting. It's doing more than what Descartes claims that it does, from Berkeley's perspective. Berkeley, in some ways, sort of laying the groundwork for someone like Heidegger, whom we've talked about previously, with this whole attunement thing, right? Order amoris. So, he goes on. But besides all the endless variety of ideas or objects of knowledge, there is likewise something which knows or perceives them. Right? All of this stuff can only take place if there's a mind to do this stuff. Right? And exercises diverse operations, such as willing, imagining, and remembering about them. That's an important list, because we're going to need that particular list as we get further on into this excerpt. Okay? Because there's going to be a certain criticism that Berkeley sees and addresses. And he's already addressed it here in the list of diverse operations that the mind does. In addition to the doubting and the convincing and all of that stuff, it also wills, imagines, and remembers. Those are important. This perceiving active being is what I call mind, spirit, soul, or self. This perceiving active being is, by which words I do not denote any one of my ideas, but a thing entirely distinct from them, wherein they exist, or which is the same thing whereby they are perceived, for the existence of an idea consists in being perceived. Okay. So this mind, or self, again, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, right? So I have this mind thing, doing the thinking thing, and the willing, and the imagining, and the remembering, and so on and so forth. That's who I am, that's me. So again, you can change this ship, still got the captain. Furthermore, this self is not any one idea. It's not any one thought. It's the thing that does the thinking. Again, laying the groundwork for Heidegger to come a couple hundred years later. Right, it's the ing. So it's not any particular thought that is me. It's the thing that houses all of these thoughts. That's me. So it's sort of like an umbrella. So all your thoughts are here. The umbrella is you. The thing, the thinking thing that has all of these thoughts in it. Then he gives this example of his writing desk. And here's where I said verb tense is important. The table I write on, I say exists. Present tense, exists. That is, I see and feel it. Right? How do I prove to myself that this table exists? I perceive it. I can see it. I can touch it. I suppose I could lick it and taste it, but I don't need to, right? I'm perceiving it right now. That's justification for the proof that it exists. That's the justification right there. That's the evidence. I'm seeing it. Therefore, it must exist. Right now. It exists. I'm using it. I can see it. I can touch it. It exists. And if I were out of my study, I should say it existed. Past tense. Notice, if my justification for its existence is my perceiving of it, when I'm out of the room, I'm not perceiving it. I don't know. I don't have good enough evidence to support the claim that the table is continuing to exist when I'm not there to perceive it. Now that sounds ridiculous. That sounds crazy. But give me some other proof. Give me some other evidence. Give me some other justification. Good justification that you would bet your life that that table is still existing even though you're not perceiving it. I wouldn't. Because again, the proof that I have that something exists is my perceiving it right then. If I'm not perceiving it right then, I can't know. It's like the cat or the dinosaur in the box. I can't know what's going on inside the box because I can't see inside the box. I don't know what's happening in my study because I'm not in my study. I don't know if the desk is still there or not. Now this seems to run counter to common sense. Things don't blink into and out of existence. But don't they? Isn't this why peekaboo is such a fascinating game for children? Because they haven't yet been trained to accept as true object permanence. I hope that's the thumbnail for this. Peekaboo, right? For all the child knows, I have ceased to exist. There I am again. Not still, there I am again. That's why it's surprising. Whoa, you appeared out of nowhere. How did that happen? So our children then become trained. They come to expect, right? My 14-year-old is no longer fascinated by peekaboo. Heck, my almost 5-year-old's not fascinated by peekaboo anymore. Because she's been trained to expect, oh wow, even if dad has disappeared, he's going to reappear again. Reappear again, that was redundant, I'm sorry. Even if he disappears, he's going to reappear. And so maybe he doesn't really disappear at all, especially if I can still hear him. So this time I'm going to not talk. Okay? Here's what I want you to do. This is going to sound goofy, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to turn around. Not face the screen that you're watching this on. I want you to turn around, and I'm going to be silent. Okay, turn back around. While you were turned around, what proof do you have that I was still existing? What proof do you have, forget about existence, maybe that's too deep. What proof do you have that I was actually still in front of the screen? That I was still on the screen that you weren't looking at? I'm sure you could scroll backwards and so on and so forth and watch and confirm, but while you're watching and confirming, what you're doing is perceiving. When you weren't perceiving, what proof do you have? None. None. You may have good justification for the belief that there were birds existing. You may have heard the birds chirping. But you didn't hear Dr. Schrappe. You couldn't hear me. You couldn't see me. I know you couldn't touch me, or smell me, or taste me. I was not accessible through any of your 5 senses. So what proof do you have that I was still on the screen? None. Logical extension, logical next step. What proof do you have that I was continuing to exist in space and time? None. Again, Dr. Schrappe, things don't just blink out of existence. How would we know if they did? And, let's think somewhat solipsistically here, would it even matter to you if they did? Does it matter to you right now, at this very moment, whether the Grand Canyon exists or not? Or does it really only matter if and when you want to go to the Grand Canyon? You really only care about its existence when it pertains to you. So right now my wife and kids are gone. They're doing something else, getting breakfast or whatever. And I'm focused on you. And that sounds a bit goofy because I'm not even with you. You know what I mean, right? I'm focused on conveying information to you. I'm not focused on my family right now. So, this is going to sound weird, but whether they're existing right now or not kind of doesn't matter to me right now. I'm not focused on them, I'm focused on you. It's like the Grand Canyon. And unless my wife or kids call me so that I can hear their voice, and even then, of course, that could be recorded, so even that's not great justification. Until I could sensorily access them again, until I could perceive them again, they might not exist. I don't know. I don't have good proof that they're existing right now. No. I don't have good evidence to support the claim that my car is in the driveway. It's probably not. That's all I can say is probables. Probably, probably, probably. Why probably? Well, because when I was in my study, there was a desk there. So probably it still is. But I have no real good evidence for it. It's not irrefutable. I could imagine it ceasing to exist. Then when I enter the study, it exists again. Not continuing to exist, existing again. I don't know what happened in the interim. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, Berkeley would be like, how can you be convinced the tree even existed during that time? Perhaps you went to the forest, bam, tree standing. You left the forest, tree ceases to exist. Then you return, bam, tree now down. You don't know what happened in the interim. Your mind fills in the blanks. That's your mind. That's not perception. Until you go back and check some video or something along those lines. Then, while you're watching the video, you're perceiving. This is crazy. It doesn't mean it's wrong. This is crazy. The table I write on, I say exists, that is, I see and feel it, and if I were out of my study, I should say it exists dead. Meaning thereby that if I was in my study, I might perceive it. He goes on. It's impossible for me to see or feel anything, page 99, without an actual sensation of that thing. So it is impossible for me to conceive in my thoughts any sensible thing or object distinct from the sensation or perception of it. He's going to talk more about this towards the bottom of page 99. Here's one of his criticisms of Locke. Locke says we have these primary qualities and secondary qualities. Primary qualities, existence in space and time, independent of me, there's objects out there. Secondary qualities have as much to do with me as it does the thing out there, and primarily about my relationship to the thing out there, with the fire and so on and so forth. Berkeley's saying, good luck actually separating those two things. The only proof, the only justification I have for the primary qualities are the secondary qualities. The only proof I have that something exists out there is because it's appealing to my senses, which is all secondary stuff. So maybe, just maybe, these two aren't different. It's all one and the same. That perhaps everything is a secondary quality, including existence in space and time. That existence in space and time is dependent upon me or someone perceiving it. That it's as relational as color and sound and all that stuff. Because again, what proof do we have that things exist out there in space and time? My own perception, based upon sensory input data, things like colors and taste and sound. For some reason now I'm thinking about the Emperor's New Clothes, where there actually aren't any clothes, but these con men convince the king that they're clothing him in the most regal and beautiful things, and only the elite of the elite will actually be able to see. And so the king doesn't want to seem like an idiot or like less than, so he goes along even though he doesn't actually perceive any clothes. So of course then out of the mouths of babes a child says the king's naked. The emperor has no clothes. And the gig is up. From what has been said, it follows that there is not any other substance other than spirit, or that which perceives. And that's what this mind, self, spirit, soul thing is. This thing that holds these thoughts, this thing which perceives and imagines and wills and remembers. For an idea to exist in unperceiving things, a manifest contradiction. Right? Again, all we ever work with are ideas. But say you, and here he means Locke, this is polite philosopher speak, instead of saying, Locke, you say this and you're completely wrong. He says, but say you, whoever you may be, we all know it's John Locke. Though the ideas themselves do not exist without the mind, yet there may be things like them whereof they are copies or resemblances. If we look but ever so little into our thoughts, we shall find it impossible for us to conceive a likeness except only between our ideas. Again, I ask, whether these supposed originals are external things, are they perceivable or not? If they are, then they're ideas, and I, Berkeley, have won, because everything's perception. To be is to be perceived. That's how you prove existence. And if they're not perceivable, I appeal anyone, whether it be sensical, to assert that a color is like something which is invisible. Hard or soft is like something which is intangible. And so the rest. If it's perceivable, then Berkeley's caught you in his trap. If it's not perceivable, then that seems to run counter to common sense. Well, yeah, color's the thing you can't see. This insensible power that happens by impulse. Oh yeah, the sounds of those birds, yeah. Sound is the thing that you can't really hear. What? What? That didn't make sense. So then he goes on. Some there are who make a distinction betwixt primary and secondary qualities. Again, he's talking about John Locke. Matter, therefore, we are to understand an inert, senseless substance in which extension, figure, and motion do actually subsist. But it is evident from what we've already shown that extension, figure, and motion are only ideas existing in the mind. That an idea can be like nothing but another idea, that consequently neither they nor their archetypes can exist in an unperceiving substance. I desire anyone to reflect and try whether we can, by any abstraction of thought, conceive the extension and motion of a body without any other sensible qualities. Can't separate the two. There's not a distinction between primary and secondary qualities. They're all the same thing. They all rely upon someone or something to perceive them. Now, maybe there are squirrels right now out in the Grand Canyon perceiving it. That's good. That's something at least. Or maybe I have a relative who is visiting the Grand Canyon right now, and so they'll call me and, you know, put me on the video thing. Wow, okay, now I can see it. At least so I think. Versus all the Zoom backgrounds and stuff. Maybe they're not really there. I don't know. Maybe they go the extra effort and like pipe in some Grand Canyon sounds as background to really convince me. I'm not there to perceive it, man. So can I be 100% sure, or it's just highly probable? The same body which appears cold to one hand seems warm to another. Now, why may we not as well argue that figure and extension are not patterns or resemblances of qualities existing in matter, because to the same eye at different stations, or eyes of a different texture at the same station, they appear various, and cannot therefore be the images of anything settled and indeterminate without the mind? All this sensible stuff that we disagree about. It's green, no, it's blue. Well, it must actually be neither, or there'd be no disagreement about it. The fact that we disagree indicates that it's different for different people. He goes on, and he's writing this in the early 1700s. I think this is 1710. In 1710, second edition, 1734. But notice here, he's already sort of anticipating the notion of the theory of relativity, special theory of relativity. All right, it appears different to different people at different times, and so on and so forth. Motion is not without the mind, since if the succession of ideas in the mind becomes swifter, the motion, it is acknowledged, shall appear slower without any alteration to any external object. If you've ever been in a car wreck, perhaps it seemed as though time slowed down or time sped up. It appeared to you, your experience of it was one of slower or faster. Or if you're an athlete and you've ever been in the zone, perhaps the ball seemed larger. I'm thinking about baseball. The ball seems like a beach ball size. You can just hit everything. You're in the zone. You're seeing it. It appears much larger. Or in golf, the golf hole seems large, like everything you put close to it's going to fall in. All of the time, we are perceiving things maybe slightly differently than other people are perceiving them. And so how stable and fixed is motion, size, time? Or is all that stuff actually relative to the one perceiving it? Relative to the one experiencing it? Relative to the perceiver? I mean, come on though, Berkeley. This is nutso. This is crazy. This can't be. Because, page 101, surely there is nothing easier than to imagine trees, for instance, in a park, or books existing in a closet, and nobody by to perceive them. Right? Can't you imagine that? Right? You can imagine the Grand Canyon with nobody there to perceive it, right? Yep. Or a park with nobody there to perceive it, not even the animals. Or books stuck in a closet somewhere. and nobody by to perceive them. Of course you can. You can imagine that. Ha-ha. Ha-ha. Now he's got you. Remember, one of the things that he means by perceiving, one of the things that the mind can do is imagine. Ah, shoot. If you're imagining it, then you are perceiving it. Darn it. What is all this? 101. I beseech you, more than framing in your mind certain ideas which you call books and trees, and at the same time omitting to frame the idea of anyone that may perceive them. But do you not yourself perceive or think of them all the while? This, therefore, is nothing to the purpose. It only shows you have the power of imagining. It does not show that you can conceive it possible that the objects of your thought may exist without the mind. So here's the dilemma. Either we keep going with Lockean-style thinking, in full-blown empiricism. All I know is what I can perceive right here and right now, because that's the only thing I have good justification for, which really limits knowledge. You can't really know much about the future. If anything, you're just making a best guess. Your knowledge about the past is reliant upon your own memory, which is frequently flawed. Or option B, God. Whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on. Wait, time out. The only way I can know that the Grand Canyon is existing right now is if I believe in God? Yep. That doesn't seem to follow. Ah, but it does. He's been laying hints throughout this excerpt. I skipped over those hints on purpose, but here are the hints. Let's go back to the desk, the table. I should say it existed, meaning thereby that if I was in my study, I might perceive it, or that some other spirit actually does perceive it. Some other thinking thing, some other mind, some other soul, some other spirit is perceiving it. Page 99. So long as they are not actually perceived by me, or do not exist in my mind, or that of any other created spirit, they must either have no existence at all, they cease to exist, or subsist in the mind of some eternal spirit. God as eternal perceiver. If I want to know that my family is still existing right now, I need to know that someone or something is perceiving them right now. How about God, the eternal perceiver, that experiences and perceives everything, everywhere, all at the same time? It's quite a leap, right? What other option you got? Either it's based on your perception or something else's perception in order to ensure continued existence. If you want to be sure the Grand Canyon is existing right now, you can't rely on the squirrels. You gotta rely on God. Now notice, this type of God doesn't necessarily, it's not something you pray to necessarily. Now Berkeley happens to be a Christian. Okay, and Cunningham points out at the very end of the introduction to this excerpt that the whole reason for doing this is Berkeley laying the groundwork for belief in God. Okay, but it's interesting because God is the conclusion, not one of the premises. Right? The premises are all about perception and knowledge. The conclusion then becomes about God. It's much tougher to refute that conclusion if you've bought into the premises. And so if you don't want to buy that conclusion, you got to work backwards and try to find a premise you disagree with. And Hume, whom we'll talk about next time, thinks he's found a loophole. Maybe. Maybe. At the very last of the introduction here, Berkeley's metaphysical immaterialism is thus linked to his theology. In place of what he regarded as the godless materialism of those who conceived of the physical world as an alien reality existing out there independent of the mind, someone like Locke or someone like that, right? Which means then the stuff out there would always be mysterious, right? I can't actually notice this alien thing out there apart from me. All I ever get at best are replications and representations of that may or may not actually be close to the thing out there. Instead of that, Berkeley offers a picture of reality as something essentially mind-dependent. Heck, even things like motion, right? It appears slower, appears faster to your mind. Mind-dependent and grounded in the divine consciousness. That's how there is a reality rather than multiple realities. This is where he ends the excerpt, further clarifying this point. The ideas of sense are more strong, lively, and distinct than those of the imagination. More clear and distinct, to use Cartesian language. Okay. So you guys can see the sun's out, right, when I'm recording this. So I want you to use your imagination. I want you to imagine that instead of a bright sunny day, that right now what you're watching is Dr. Schrappe standing fully bundled up, covered in snow. It's a cold, snowy night when I'm recording this instead. Go ahead, use your imagination. I'm trying, I can't do it. I can't convince myself that it's a cold, snowy night. I can't do it. My imagination, as strong and as powerful as it is, cannot override my senses. My senses are telling me it's a sunny day. Your senses presumably are telling you the same thing. Now maybe you can put some type of filter on or something, you know, on the computer technology, whatchamacallit thing. But your senses alone cannot, your imagination alone cannot convince you that your senses are wrong. Your senses are more clear and distinct, to use Berkeleyan language. They're more strong, lively, and distinct than the imagination. Which means then that reality is not dependent upon my perception. Reality is dependent upon God's perception. God's perception, God's reality is actual reality. That's what I get at through the world of the senses. God's perceiving right here, right now as sunny day. My imagination cannot override that. My senses win. And so Berkeley here, even though he takes this God turn, is still somewhat rooted in empiricism. The senses can be believed most of the time. It actually does give you pretty good access to the world as it actually is. Pretending has its limits. Imagination has its limits. My almost 5-year-old daughter, I'll ask her today if I remember to. Even when we're pretending to be animals, I don't think she's convinced we actually are. And we really get into the roles, man. We're method actors and actresses here at the Schrappe household. We get into the role. And we make the noises, we crawl around, we do the whole thing. But she knows we're pretending. We're using our imagination. We don't actually become the animals. She doesn't see me as a giraffe. I'm Dad pretending to be a giraffe. That's different. Because I'm not actually a giraffe. God is not perceiving me as giraffe. Likewise, the actual world that we perceive, not the one that we imagine, the one that we actually perceive, likewise has a steadiness, an order, a coherence. Go back to that sustaining aspect of God that we talked about before with Descartes and the math and all of that. There's an order, there's a consistency, a coherence. My imagination may flit all about, changing. The things I'm perceiving aren't like that. Again, it may be one indication that I'm awake rather than dreaming. Dreaming's my imagination. When I'm awake, it's actual reality. When I'm asleep, it's just me perceiving, my mind's eye or something along those lines. When I'm awake, that's God's perceiving stuff. I could daydream, I could doze off and actually fall asleep and dream that, it's a cold, snowy night. But when I wake up, not the case. My imagination doesn't win. My senses do. Why do my senses win? Because that's actual reality as determined by God. And again, this type of God is really just necessary for the rest of this metaphysical system to work. This is not necessarily a Christian God or a Muslim God or a Hindu God. No. There are very few attributes here. And when we turn to the God stuff in probably about a week and a half or so, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah. When we turn to the God stuff, I'll draw the distinction between, okay, there's the philosophical question, does God exist? The religious question then is, if so, which one? This doesn't get to number 2. This is just, yeah, God must exist in order for us to have knowledge, in order for us to know things about the future. To know things even that we're not perceiving. We have something that's perceiving them. It's really well written. It's, again, a closed system. It's difficult to think your way out of it, if it's possible at all to think your way out of it. Or maybe you really are stuck with knowledge here and now and that's it. Or God, and nothing else. This admirable connection, this steadiness, this order, this coherence, whereof sufficiently testifies the wisdom and benevolence of its author. We learn by experience, these laws of nature, which teaches us that such and such ideas are attended with such and such other ideas in the ordinary course of things. Things like gravity, for instance. I could imagine gravity not working. That doesn't then make gravity not work. Interesting stuff, I think. Again, might be completely wrong. I really think it's interesting stuff. So there's just going to be the one video for today, because I really want you to ramble around with what Berkeley's talking about and really ruminate on it and think about it a while before moving on to a potential loophole, a potential third option. You should kind of wrestle with these two options, see if you can come up with a third option. See you next time.